Virtual reality. It is the future. Soon we will all be bowing to our reptilian overlords on the computer. With our computer that displays our physical computer to our face computer. This is big. Massive, in fact. And leading the way is Meta, helmed by none other than the Zuck.
Lizard Man.
Virtual reality is the future, and the world is not buying it.
I spent some time in there for our story, and I mean, a lot of these worlds are empty.
They've poured billions and billions of dollars into the metaverse, only to have less to show for it than a team of like 30 people with VR chat.
The Iceland Tours. Enhanced actual reality without silly-looking headsets.
So, yeah, people are not as on board with the future of VR as companies would have hoped, which, I mean, in all fairness, should be no surprise. It was only last year where we were told that NFTs and cryptocurrency were going to be the way forward for everyone. And we all know how that's going. So, what hope does virtual reality really have? Is this just a market we don't fully understand yet, or is this secretly a blossoming industry waiting to be tapped into? Well, I'm fortunate enough to know an industry insider who was willing to do an interview with me on the subject, but on the condition that it had to be in VR chat. I want you to meet Dilly Wolf, real name Roxanne. She is a 3D modeler and former employee at Pimax, a VR headset company based out of Shanghai, China. Dilly has worked remotely for the company for the better part of 2 years, getting her foot in the door to the industry when she was just a sophomore in high school. And it gets better. That thing about her being a 3D modeler, well, she self-taught herself Blender, has handled software development, product design and presentation, has seen tech that has yet to even be announced to the consumer market, and has spent a collective 14,000 hours in Steam VR alone. That equates to 1.5 years of life with a headset attached to her head. If anyone was going to vouch for the future of VR, it was going to be Dilly. And to hear it from her, in the short term, it'll still remain a commodity, but in the long term, it could be just as important as your phone.
For a while, it'll definitely remain as you go inside your house and use. It's not really going to be something you see out on the streets per se for a while, but it's definitely going to become a home commodity in the future. Now, in the distant future, it'll just be having a phone on you or having a watch or whatever. It'll just be something we don't think about in the future. Right now, though, I'd say for the next 5 years, VR is definitely going to remain a little bit more it's becoming more mainstream, and it will definitely become mainstream, but it's definitely going to be more of a thing used for gaming and for, maybe certain workflows in the home instead of just being a, everyday, day-to-day thing for a lot of people.
So, obviously, Meta are trying to be the frontrunners of the VR industry, having sunk billions and billions of dollars into the metaverse, their headsets, and everything in between. So I brought this up to Dilly to see if she agreed with anything that they were doing. And while she did to a certain extent, she's right there with you. Meta has left a lot to be desired.
Well, I do find it very good that they're trying to make VR more mainstream per se, despite the fact that they're going into debt heavily as a result. They're expecting to somehow make that back. And I do think hardware-wise, they're doing a really good job in, making VR equipment cheap and accessible, and you don't need a big $1,000 PC or whatever. But I think their approach on the software end is really wrong. They're trying to sell this whole metaverse thing with cryptocurrencies being a necessity and NFTs and all that. And that's not what people really want. What people really want is a whole place of user-generated content that is cheap and or free. People don't necessarily want the metaverse to be as close to reality as possible. While realism is important, it isn't everything, because a lot of people want to use these to escape reality, not just live in reality too.
Companies like Meta have been pushing pretty hard for this VR future onto consumers these past couple of years, and even though there is a lot of excitement for it, there is also a lot of hesitation. I mean, a lot of you probably watching right now don't see a need for a VR headset beyond the occasional Beat Saber or VR chat, so I brought this up and I asked, is this hesitation justified? And while she does agree to an extent, the reason for this hesitation, she believes, is because we just simply had a bad first impression.
On paper, it sounds very egregious, fitting 2 screens on your face, sometimes 1, depending on the headset model. But the reason there is so much skepticism of this technology is because back in 2013, no, I'd say 2014 to like 2015, there's a huge rise in this, like, those, like, you know, crappy phone VR headsets you put your phone into and strap to your face and whatnot. And that, like, ruined people's, like, you know, expectation for what VR was, because it wasn't true VR. It really ruined a lot of people's perception on VR as a whole. And because they were so insanely cheap and accessible, so many people got to try it, and so many people got to have this bad expectation. So I do think their reasoning is justified, but I do think they should look at what we have now in today's world and definitely, like, give it another try. While it's definitely not like super duper seamless or perfect right now, I do think it is more than good enough for the people who wanted to, you know, use phone VR to like, kind of play games, watch a video or something. It's more than enough for that now.
While there is a lot of uncertainty about the industry, there are tons and tons of people just like Dilly who are excited for the technology and what VR has for the future. So, as my final question to someone who is passionate about this industry and its future, I decided to ask, how has VR affected you?
It's completely shifted my life for me personally ever since I touched it back when I was way younger. It definitely made me more interested in, like, programming, modeling, which is, like, you know, my main job now. It's helped me come out of my shell a little bit, even if I'm not the best at it still, but it's definitely made me very passionate about this technology going forward, because, you know, I've always seen it in movies and I thought, oh, this is something we wouldn't have for years, but this is something we have now. I'd say it's definitely really changed my life, because I got so interested in, you know, making plugins and modeling for it and, you know, trying to make my own little games with it, that I ended up landing me a job in the industry just due to, like, dumb luck and having connections and, I guess, you know, relentlessly working hard about it. Yeah, I guess it gave me motivation to really proceed with, like, this, I guess, career path that I've chosen, and being, like, a modeler or, like, you know, a 3D game artist and whatnot, or VFX artist in general. I've definitely learned a lot the past 2 years.
All right, well.
Thank you so much for having this interview with me. After talking to Dilly, I am fully convinced that there is a beaming industry waiting to reach its maximum potential. We are in the wild, wild west of VR, and honestly, who can blame you? What's more exciting than creating a second reality? Will this industry blast off the way people are hoping for? And if so, are Meta gonna be the ones leading the charge? I mean, they did promise legs for their avatars after all, so that's gotta be a sign.
It was a lie. The demonstration of the legs for the avatar was fake. It was pre-rendered. They couldn't even get it right for their own f***ing conference.
Maybe someone else.